Okay. Thanks for everyone coming to the June TAC meeting. We'll go ahead and get started. I don't have a copy of the agenda with me. But I do know, I think we're just here to essentially discuss the TMP update, correct?
And remove and approve the minutes from May 3rd.
Okay, so yeah, we'll go ahead and start. Turn the time over to the chair.
Welcome, thanks for being here. Our committee, the planning committee, thank you. Josh, you just take care of that now.
The minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I missed the question.
We need
You just need a motion.
move to,
Motion.
thank you, all in favor of putting the minutes. Opposed. Thanks. Anything else?
Minutes are approved, so now it's just moving on to the TMP update.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have brought together the TAC as well as some planning commission members. They got some questions and we'll kind of go through this TMP update, transportation master plan. John Dorney is here with Horrocks. He's the consultant that's helped draft this, and I also brought or invited Bob Allen back from MAG. He's our MAG representative that we work with for the projects. So essentially, I'll turn the time over to question and answer just to see what directions we want. I know there's some discussion about projects. Murray has brought up some questions about connectivity. And I also have copies of the letter that TAC back in November had drafted with some concepts that they'd like to address when they go forward with the TMP as it goes for approval. So with that time, I'll turn it over to any of you that have questions, comments, or discussion items.
I have a question. The biggest project I saw
Mhm.
is 120 million for apply over 800 south over I-15.
Yep.
And we dealt with this 6 years ago. And I asked 6 years ago why we needed this, and I didn't get a good answer. I would like to hear what the current thinking is around this. Why is this necessary? Do this, because it's not connecting into the freeway at all. It's just
An overpass.
it's just gonna make 800 south. Another thoroughway. Yeah.
So
But I wanna hear, sorry, I shouldn't, I disclosed I've already shown you my hand, right?
No, you're
So tell
fine.
me, what's the justification and where does this project stand?
So that project along with, there were a few others that were identified in a study that was performed by, I believe it was Avenue Consultants, and it was the UVU area transportation study. In that, so they looked at what UVU does for generating traffic and what it can do to mitigate certain things. They looked at University Parkway being the only access for Orem neighborhoods to go from east to west or west to east, whichever way you want to go. And in that, because of the university, they identified a few projects. One was a northbound direct connect. So if you're heading northbound on I-15, that would go straight into the campus. Another one they identified.
Direct flying. Right.
No,
Well, yeah, no, that was discussed 6 years ago. I don't know. I didn't
yeah,
see
but
it on
in this,
But it was discussed.
thrown out.
so in this study that wasn't discussed. The other one that they came up with was also a grade separated intersection with Sand Hill Road and University Parkway. So instead of having that continuous flow intersection, it would be more like an interchange to where through traffic would just go ahead and continue east-west. And then if you want to go ahead and get off, go ahead and access the campus that way. There was also, yes, University Parkway would likely go over and Sand Hill would go under. And then there was also looking at 12th West and Center Street, looking at doing a dual, if you're heading northbound, a dual left, and then being able then to go ahead and get northbound on I-15 at Center Street. So there were some improvements with that, as well as 8 South, as they looked at 8 South having an overpass. Understanding that it was going to be for roughly 10 to 12,000 cars. I think more or less it was something that would essentially service, you would have It was also identified to have some sort of a connection there for the BRT phase 2, instead of having BRT going through University Parkway just to go through the campus and then come back on Parkway. It would actually utilize that to go through campus and then go ahead and continue eastbound if you're heading east. But also it also provides another connection for Orem residents, instead of having to go to Parkway to go there or having to go to 4th North, that they could go ahead and, or 4th South, they could go ahead and access 8th South. Understanding that those were just projects that they identified that helped with level of service.
For you,
So,
not necessarily for the city of Orem.
well, regardless of how you feel,
Yeah.
obviously it's stating that there is a benefit to Orem citizens. Instead of having, if you lived in the Springwater area, effectively, you would never have to get on Parkway. You could go up 8th South and access the mall and do all those things. But understanding all of that, these big ticket type projects essentially would not, $120 million project would not be funded by the city of Orem. And understanding too, these projects, if you look at some of where it says funding and assistance on one of the columns, this plan identifies all of the traffic and transportation problems within our city. Not necessarily going to be funded by the city, but they're all of the needs that would happen here. And that would be funded through UDOT, it would be funded through the city, or it would be funded through MAG in the city, UDOT in the city and UTA and UDOT, which is what the BRT project did. So there's multiple funding sources, but essentially what the plan does is it identifies the projects or the needs that are within the city, and those are from models. Okay. As those projects get identified, they're in this list, but then if we see the need to have that project happen, then it goes through a very large process. We go through a study, we go through a public process where we have open houses and things like that. And that's kind of how the project gains legs and gains traction. Right now, essentially what these lists do is it's just identifying the deficiencies we have in the city. Whether or not we decide to take action is a whole nother thing.
So what, I assume MAG, or UDOT would fund most, all of it, would the city contribute some of that?
It depends on how it happens. A project like that, it possibly would be initiated by the city. Gosh, I have never done an overpass project, so I wouldn't know. I know 16th North, there was a jurisdictional transfer. And when that happened, essentially UDOT took it over. But I mean, on a project of that magnitude, I don't see.
125 million is out of our ballpark.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be
Well, that's
UDOT
UDOT.
facility.
Yeah.
So what, it doesn't benefit UDOT. Except it doesn't benefit UDOT at all. It's
Well,
like UTA.
It'll benefit UDOT a lot because the parkway is the problem. And anything that can get people out of the parkway and moving through the community without having to use the parkway, it's a benefit to UDOT. And UDOT is, in fact, in a few instances, started putting money on non-UDOT facilities because they see that it benefits their system. And so it doesn't have direct ramps to I-15, and they actually probably would like that because it facilitates, well, it facilitates your community, people, the students, it facilitates people that live in your community to get across the freeway without having to go through the heart of darkness, right?
I mean, if that's a truism, I get it, that they're investing in non-UDOT facilities. I've never seen it, but if that's true, then, okay. But I've never seen it.
Not a lot, but they have done it. Like a good example would be, it used to be called Bulldog, but now it's Cougar Boulevard or whatever. That's never been, isn't a UDOT facility, and 90% of that project was funded by UDOT.
The pedestrian bridge too is funded by UDOT as well.
Well, this was put on the master plan by who? By the Orem master plan, but it's a UDOT project.
So the way projects get on here is we work collectively with MAG, Mountain Association of Governments, and they have a very large regional transportation model. And all of these kind of meld together, and then for one to support the other, they go into these plans.
So if UVU were to get capped, or they build a second university in Utah County, I mean, so this is based on, I assume, how are we looking at the study to see what assumptions it's based on? I have an assumption about the way you was going to go, is probably not the same that the study was done.
Right.
As we've done some advocating for additional colleges here in our county, which we need, but,
I'm not super familiar with the exact details of the study, but I would assume the basis for it would be our travel demand model that looks out decade by decade and looks at population forecasts and growth through those decades, as well as employment, as well as students. And I'm certain that they consulted pretty heavily with the university at the time, at least and so that's one thing about these things is these projects take a long time. And so we kind of have to, if we wait around till you kind of have to make a decision, say this is the snapshot that we're dealing with, let's do the study, see what it tells us. And then if we, like Sam mentioned, if a project's going to get built, it's going to go through a very rigorous environmental impact statement or environmental process that will relook at all of this information before any major decisions are made. And so, yeah, this, in looking at this and looking at any transportation plan, it's kind of the very first step in a very long chain of steps that need to take place before major infrastructure. I mean, UDOT does this a lot. If they're going to invest $100+ million, they're going to make sure there's a lot of rigorous work behind it before they do that.
so 2 questions. One of the cities Orem, we said, actually, what we'd like UVU to do is to be more self-contained, like BYU and many college campuses in America, where they actually try and limit the through traffic in and around campuses. Like it's done around BYU and others. You know, where does that go? Does that go here? So that's my first question. The second question is, and what's the planning commission's remit around this? You know, do we say, yeah, we like this, or, I mean, what impact would that have on UDOT or MAG or anything moving forward?
Well,
Sorry.
I think we just throw something out there, UVU is unique
right.
compared to BYU because there's no housing, there's no, I mean, it's a commuter school. So we have uniqueness at UVU that we can't compare to BU or BYU or other schools like that.
But there are schools across America that, you look at college campuses, they change their traffic patterns as they grow.
I agree, but it's not fair compared to BYU.
No, I'm not, I understand that.
But
I was thinking, I've got other campuses in mind that are not
That's
as
fair.
big as UDOT.
I don't have an answer to the rest of it.
So what are you asking, I guess?
Maybe I would say you control land use, right? You control, and land use is the building block of all transportation, right? And traditionally in Utah and most of the time in just about every other state, transportation lags a little behind transportation because again, we're not going to invest a ton of money in transportation if the land use people, the students in your case, aren't there. And so if you want to change the way UVU acts, functions, then you have to change the land use around it and affect the land use around it. If the students aren't coming, if the apartments are there where the students don't need to commute, then that can change things, you know, and that's the bridge is a good example of how you can get a lot of students back and forth from all that of housing without putting them through the parkway and so forth. But really it comes down to your choices with land use. If you approve a whole bunch of stuff down there, it's gonna bring traffic. But it's also gonna, if you make a bunch of housing for students, then maybe they don't have to travel so much. So really, a lot of land use is this building block of transportation systems, and it's essentially up to you to decide what your land use is. Granted, you gotta be realistic and work with the university. You're not gonna just tell them to shut everything off at once. You can't do that. But you control what happens in your city and land by controlling land use, and land use is the building block of all transportation.
That's it.
What do we do if one of us has a really good idea that we would like to submit? And I'm speaking on behalf of Mike, But at the Orem Front Runner meeting, Mike had a really good idea about adding access for UVU, and it was UVU in attendance, and they seemed to really like it. Mike, would you like to explain?
Well, we already talked a little bit about dedicated on and off ramps, both directions. So that the traffic from University Parkway is mitigated because students don't have to use it anymore. They're not going through the roundabout, they're not going down Center or up 12th West because they have accesses that are dedicated for them to get on and off the freeway. And then we stop impinging on the neighborhoods too. That was my big push for using land use around the track station.
So if you have residents in UVU all thinking this idea is worth exploring, how do we put it forward to city engineers or UDOT or somebody?
Well, I think one of those is in the plan, right?
Yeah, the northbound direct connect is in the plan. The southbound one was a little more challenging in that it seemed like we had to go back to the north quite a ways and consume some commercial properties along there. It's not to say that we can't do that. It was just trying to fit that additional lane in there, fly over and then land. Took a lot of space.
The weave would be hard too with University Parkway, and you know what I mean by weave, right? Like traffic getting, the reason why traffic slows down around the parkway is because cars are getting on and off. And the more cars that are trying to do this close to each other, the more it slows down the freeway and the less effective the freeway becomes. And
Yeah, I was
so-
thinking more off ramps like the 123rd exit. Where they go under the overpass basically to get into the mall area. So they're not actually affecting anything in the parkway because it's a separate route.
Right.
But to your point, it's only one direction.
Yes, the north.
Well, right, the north,
Southbound
the
is,
southbound, you go under the freeway and up.
southbound, they haven't done it because of
Yeah.
the weaving.
I mean, it'd be cost, but
Yeah, there, and I guess to back up to, initially at 8 South, they looked at having what they called an HOT, high occupancy transit type interchange, similar to what's at 400 South in Salt Lake, where they have that HOV type where it's in the middle. And that way it would hopefully account for transit users, students and whatnot to go ahead and get off there, because you really couldn't have another traditional type interchange at 8 South with University Parkway so close because of your point, the weaving, trying to get on and off and people to get in, and it just would be a nightmare. So they initially looked at that, and then they just settled on maybe we don't want to have access there because of neighborhood concerns. We just have an overpass, and then maybe folks can get off of Center Street and they could come up Geneva and over, and then they could come up and over. So there's been many iterations, and then the latest one was just the overpass. So
yeah, I'm more concerned about the existing neighborhoods and the impact all that has on them. You're basically wiping out whole side of 800 South eventually. And then you're putting the road down 700 South to avoid hitting UVU property.
oh, are you talking about the west side of the freeway?
I'm talking about the east side of the freeway.
Oh,
If you look at the map, it juts out, goes up to 700 South, comes down, and then starts the overpass on 7th South, not 8 South. To
yeah. So
bypass UVU property.
So that's one of the things that we were looking at trying to, with that one, UVU would like to maximize their property, not necessarily have that bisect. So they move that further to the north
I'm sure.
and go along there. With the thought though, then they would be buying one of the larger student housing complexes there that are along I-15, and understanding too, not all of them, but there are a lot of rentals in that area too. So that was some thoughts and consideration there, understanding that there is a concern, but that's why a big project like that, there is a need, we all can see it, but it's just a matter of when do we want to have that? When is the level of service such? And then when is the time to pull that trigger? Because the hard part is that, and to Jay's point, is that it doesn't really service a lot of traffic. It's not like it's instantly going to take 30,000 vehicles off. It's going to be 10, 15. So the cost per rider, when you're talking 120 million for that many when is it actually worth it? And that's when it would come to a body like this and we'd say, hey, let's go ahead and move forward. And then likely, if that was the case, we're ready for it, we would be engaging UDOT, we would be engaging UVU, because they all have to be the major partners in that process. So
And there's competition for funds, and so it has to make UDOT say, why are we spending this much money here whenever, other places, whether it's accidents and crashes, there's all different parameters that you're competing with legislative funding, and it gets prioritized.
What is the level of service now at Parkway and Sandville? Are they even, is it even on their radar? It's not that bad. I mean, at 5 o'clock, it's not ideal.
Right.
It's not, but it's no worse than 90% of the crowd
Right.
out here.
right.
Yeah, Center Street's twice as bad.
I'm wondering, does this flyover connect to Geneva and say,
Yes,
Yeah,
so it benefits Vineyard? Those
Well,
residents are all gonna be. able
right,
to
but it's
just
gonna do-
fly
it's
over
gonna-
to them all.
right. Whether
then they'll
they're,
all use that pathway rather than 12 south.
And the problem is that's 25. Right, and Parkway's 45 miles per hour.
Oh,
Why
okay.
would you take 8 south unless we're gonna change the speed limit?
Well-
When you can get on Parkway.
and understanding all of that, I
It's
mean,
in there to widen.
and that's why I say, if this project were to move forward, we would be looking at the entire corridor. 'Cause there's a piece of 8 South, what is it, from Orem Boulevard to Main Street or 400 West that's narrower than the rest of them. So it would have to be something that we're gonna look at the big picture. It's like, this is the one piece, but likely, okay, this is what we're doing. That piece would be something that I would go to MAG for and say, hey, look, we know this project is coming. It's been programmed for 2040. We would like to have the corridor widened and set up by 2035 or whenever we're going to MAG and we're asking for money. So that's,
So the plan is already talking about widening 8 south to 5 lanes. So it's in here to basically wipe out the neighborhood. To widen the road for UVU and UTA.
right, that's a need, right? It's all a need. It's like, do we have the need? Does the community desire that? And I think to that point, and I mean, I guess to back up, it's like, these are all based off of models, growth, pinch points, level of service that is poor. If we don't want to do those, we want to eliminate those, then that's fine. We can go ahead and do that. But the fact of the matter is if they come back up at a later date, we have to go through the same process to get those back on the plan, get those understood, and then you're just pushing back time to add them to do it again. So we can do whatever.
Could I
But-
ask, I think the elephant in the room for the planning commission is we don't hear anyone being concerned about the residents of Warren. I mean, it's very easy to say, well, we'll have to sacrifice a neighborhood for a need. These are lives. I mean, the neighborhoods that we're talking about with this road, these are older neighborhoods, they are older people. The majority of them don't intend to move. And we can just callously take out a whole neighborhood. I think that's what we all struggle with. We understand that sometimes needs have to be accommodated. That is just a really hard decision because these residents have no idea we're even discussing this, and we feel like we hold their lives in our hand. That is a large responsibility to balance what is the right thing to do, what isn't.
Well, I guess, so I can speak from experience that I would disagree. Because I went through this process and John can attest to it because he was there. When we first approached the neighborhood about 16th North, from State Street to 1200 West to widen it to 5 lanes, we came to them and I laid out 4 separate plans. One that was where we would either leave it as it is and let them know what the level of service would be, what they could expect for delay, doing a symmetrical widening where they could keep their home, but we would take 5 to 10 feet on either side and what that would be like, widen to the north or widen to the south. And I laid out what they would expect in 10, 15 years. I put in their costs, what each one of those would cost. And I don't recall, there was one person that said they weren't a fan of it, but they realized that right now during the peak, they got to wait 20 minutes to get out. And when we explained to them the process of buying the home, the process for relocation assistance, right after that meeting, I had 8 people come to me and they wanted that for us to buy their homes. And we've bought 6 of them so far. So I mean, I've gone through that whole exercise and I'm not saying that all are going to be the same, but those people that live there, they saw the process, they saw the need. And I told them, we're not going to take your home if you don't want to take it. But I mean, I laid out what was there and they were all very supportive of it. So I mean, I understand that there is a concern. But when I dealt with all those folks who initially it was kind of pitchforks and they wanted the city that we were just going to come in and condemn them. And I told them exactly how the process was. They were very amicable and still to this day, there's people wanting us to buy their homes because they want to go ahead and get the best that they can for it and move on and not be on that corridor.
So Sam, what's the timing of that conversation versus planning process versus construction? Because I think that maybe the concern is, we haven't had that level of conversation on 800 South. If we put it in the plan now, somebody will see it, they're gonna get upset maybe and start a conversation. But when would you normally have that conversation in comparison to when you construct? As opposed to comparison when it wound up in a planning or a transportation?
So the only time that we're gonna actually go out and be meeting with the people on 16th North, 8th South, 8th East is when the level of service is such that we've exceeded it. We're now in an E and we're in our peak hour is now a peak 3 hours. And now I'm getting complaints and I've done the spot fixes of trying to improve intersections. We've tried to change timing. We're trying to get people through and finally it's just like, and sometimes it's from public safety saying, look, we can't respond, we can't react, we can't do anything. And then once that happens, then we bring it to, typically it'll be our TAC and just say, hey, look, this is where we're at. Are you guys ready to move forward with this? And we'll start an open house. We'll let everyone know it's coming. And that's when it happens. So we're talking.
How long had it been on the planning commission?
For 16th North?
Yeah, before you had that meeting.
Oh, gosh.
So the meeting that
Yeah, 10, 15 years.
was 5 years ago.
Okay.
So
But
that
I had that meeting, yeah.
5 years ago.
And that's construction hadn't started yet, but it was likely on your plan 10 to 20 years before you had the meeting. So in this case, where we're talking about 800, it's gonna be 15, 20 years before they start to have a meeting.
Yeah.
So from-
Actually, it
But
was.
they do start acquiring space and then it opens up. You can look down at south right now, we have all that wide open space because it's on the plan. So you can't build on it because it's on the plan, so you can't use the space. I could put a bunch of houses down 8 South by Costco, but can't because it's on the plan. So
So-
we're limiting what we can do within the city because we put it on.
So
Same
16th,
with 8 East.
16th North was on the plan. It probably would have been built earlier had the Pleasant Grove interchange not been built. When that happened, then all of a sudden Linden and that piece of Pleasant Grove had a different access point. But as they built out and developed, traffic came back to 16th North and that's how it moved. So it's been on the screen for a while.
This is very crazy. I think that there's a misunderstanding from the planning commission about like your role, our role. I think they look at this and it looks like target practice. And like, why do we have a city engineer over transportation, over traffic? Because I mean, maybe just explain why you even have your job. Because it seems like maybe there's a misunderstanding about like who looks at the intersections and the traffic flow. Do they know what level of service even means? You know, I feel like they've looked at this and maybe it feels like a threat. And maybe they haven't seen the process like we have, who've been on the transportation commission, you know what I'm saying?
Can I build off her question, because it was one of the things I actually researched this afternoon, like what's the purpose of this commission in relations to city council and to us and what's going on? And it was really interesting to read through, and I think it would be helpful for us to understand what the role of the Transportation Advisory Commission is, because I think that there's a lot of information here that's kind of missing that hasn't been explained to the planning commission.
And maybe start with, why does the city of Warren need a traffic engineer? Why don't we hire-
Justify your
So, you know, because it's happening. we're not asking.
No.
Like, for me, it's very clear why you have a job here and what your job is, but I think maybe there's some gaps.
Also, I feel like there's some gaps in what we do, because I feel like we sit in meetings and say, hey, wait a minute, people that live on that street aren't gonna like that idea. And so that's our job as to be more on the committee to say, hey, wait a second, I live right by there, I use that all the time. Your information, your modeling doesn't quite match the lived experience, or what are we gonna do about XYZ problem? Or this is, somebody in my neighborhood knows I'm on this committee and is worried about school safety, how do we address that? So we have that, like, that is our role on the committee as we talk about some of the projects.
We are to traffic what you are to develop.
Yeah.
And we were talking about
For South Northwest, and how difficult it was when Jay's daughter was the little girl that got hit. And then we got a stoplight going up. It went up faster after that accident. But we had already talked about that as being a problem, and what do we do? And the thing is, from a planning commission standpoint, I would guess that your time of talking about it, the implementation is a lot longer runway sometimes than we have in transportation, when we've got a problem right now,
Yeah,
and it has to be fixed.
in response to that, it's kind of interesting from our side and the planning commission side, because we're kind of split. Half the stuff that we do is stuff that's been going through the planning process and comes to us, and for lack of a better word, we're the final look at it and say, okay, yeah, and then many cases, we actually just have to say yes. That's a lot of our administrative stuff, is looking at it and being like, okay, yeah, it meets the plan. We'll talk about some concerns. We've had some issues with those. When we get to some of the more legislative stuff, which this includes, we have a little more leeway to look into it, to make our recommendation to the city council. And it's really interesting, because if you look at, the city code, the transportation advisory committee, the first thing that's on it is that you're responsible for the transportation master plan and updating and making that recommendation to city council. And of course, it has to come to us as legislative. And so we're just a step, we are a step in that process. We're not just a step, we are a step in that process. And so it's kind of interesting for us as we get all these master plans. We did economic last year, we did this, I'm sure we've got water and anything else coming. Parks, there's gonna be other things coming. And at some point, you guys are gonna have to update the whole master plan, you know.
The general plan.
The master part of
The general
That's
plan.
the general plan.
3 points if I can make. One is, to your point, to Sam's point, the city and MAG do not take houses through eminent domain. It's willing seller, willing buyer. So they never come in and take neighborhoods. Everything around UVU with the housing district that they bought, it was all willing private parties buying and selling. And so they can't, and they don't. Even the corridor preservation funds that MAG gives out after you apply for them is willing seller, willing buyer. And so they don't go in and just take neighborhoods without some process. The other comment is, we're up here looking at the future. As we get closer to reality, it's much easier to kill a project than it is to start one. We've already discussed the 1600 North. We did that 5 years ago. It just seemed like the other day, and it's been 5 years since we had that open house over at the senior center. And we're not telling you to just trust us, we'll take care of it later. It really is a long process, and it's easier to get to the end and say, is that an issue, yes or no? Is this an issue, yes or no? If there's a safe routes to school issue, if there's a bus stop issue, the ones on 1600 North were like, our garbage cans are out in the middle of a road, and we hate it, and we actually showed them a cross section of a driveway of what their house looks like now, and what their car parked in the driveway with garbage can and the truck stopping, and it wouldn't have been fun to live there. And so I think as we look at where we're at now, the 50,000 foot view, and as we travel down this path, it's easier, and Bob can confirm, projects can die faster than
Well,
they
things change. Well,
yeah, they die faster than they get started. And so you'll have a lot of looks at it. And I think in the last planning commission meeting, you mentioned the document being thick, not knowing once everything is inside.
I always suggest people look at the table of contents, and I can almost go through it with you and say, these are just policies. There's a little section between page like 17 and 33, which are all these maps. And the rest are traffic study impact guidelines. And so there's a lot of stuff in there that if you're interested, you can look at, but it's not gonna change land use. It's not gonna, the building blocks. You're not approving densities. It's really, how far should this access be from a next access? And that's just has to do with safety. And there's a transit component that just says, here's what Magus has planned for transit. Here's what UTA has planned. And so the core of it is really what we've been talking about. And if you want to go through the table of contents and look at it, you kind of almost be like, yeah, those are just existing policy.
Right.
That isn't changing much.
I'll tell you what I would like, and this is probably why I'm at the meeting, page 35 on there is what the goals are. But there was nothing in there to help me understand in any way what any of that would look like. So I understand we don't have a definite plan yet, but just a little comprehension of how this will affect Orem and the people around. I think that is what we were asking for. It's just give us more details than just one page and ask us to vote on that. We would, I would love to have more information on the I-15 parallel corridor. Connecting Pioneer Crossing to University Parkway and calling it a new freeway. What is that about? Can you tell us more so that we understand it? Because we don't understand this at all. It just looks a little frightening to us.
And I'm gonna jump off somebody else's question again, because I'm representative too, specifically, because this refers to max RTP. So also in the middle of updating, am I correct?
It was adopted on Thursday.
It was adopted on Thursday,
Yes.
okay.
That was adopted by the board, which
Yeah.
is all the elected
So
officials.
your mayor sits on that board.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that because there seems to be, anyway, I was looking online, there seems to be some discrepancy in a couple of things, but yes, I would agree that. How do we interpret this document in relation to that plan?
So. Bear with me. Be patient with me. I think something that. Planning commission members, you guys created a master plan, right? A land use plan, right? You've created your general plan, and what you did probably is you step back and say, okay, what is the city gonna look like in 5, 10, 20, 30 years? You probably had a number of people that you were probably gonna grow by, you probably had a number of
Can I just pause for a second?
yeah,
Can we eat?
please do.
Because
Yeah.
let's go ahead and grab something to eat, because
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll channel my gravity first.
everyone's grabbing chips and starting to eat.
Yeah.
We won't be able to hear each other, so. Go ahead and grab some to eat. I just
go grab it.
Yeah. Free for all.
Did you do much with Warm Fest?
No,
Never know how much the city's involved.
that's a different committee.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a committee and a lot of interns.
Okay. Makes sense, short term, it's not all year long.
Yeah. They start planning for it about a year ahead of time, though. The committee does.
I bet we'll have to get it. Set up.
Yeah.
Plan for it, 'cause, I'm sure the carnival is picked up in all the cities. I know they are actually.
Yeah,
I've gone to the parade.
that's basically the same one that goes all over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get the Gravitron in Linden, you get it in PG, you get it in
Everywhere.
Fort, Spanish Fort.
Yeah,
But that's what makes some of the summer fun.
that's right.
Going to Strawberry Days, going to Orange Fest, go to all the,
I love it.
yeah, Strawberry Days was always at my birthday.
What was it?
And I always felt kind of cheated going to the restaurant.
We used to go to the rodeo when we lived in Pleasant Grove. That was fun.
Yeah, it is fun. I haven't been for quite a few years. I should go, because I always enjoy it.
We go to the one up in Oakley too,
Oh, really?
in July. In fact, this year is going, we're on July 1st. Oh, it's, yeah. Yeah.
I'm always looking for things like that. Like good outing days.
When the kids were little, I got, the first time we went, we got perfect seats right in the middle, sun at our backs, right down front, see all the, almost, touch the horses, the bulls and everything. Kids loved it. My husband's eyes were they were blood red. I've never seen eyes like that before. So allergic to horses. So following year, and we had horses, so that was kind of interesting. But following year, we moved up higher.
Right.
Still saw all the action, just not quite as close.
It's probably part of grooming too. You probably groom your own horses a little more. And during rodeo time, they're probably sweaty and actively used, so
Yeah.
the musk is stronger and stuff. The
Yeah.
dander.
Yeah, it was funny, but we learned.
Yeah.
We don't sit down.
Take your
for it
history with you too.
Yeah. I've never seen eyes that red. It was like
Oh.
cyclops, not cyclops, but just,
That made a big impression on your kids probably. It's a
Yeah.
good
like,
spot.
what's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's-
Yeah, but they love being there down by the horses.
That's cool. Yeah, I was more like that. I didn't take my kids as often as my grandparents took me. So
Oh,
I did, thank you. Good, how about yourself? Yeah.
gonna get
How long does that record?
either as long as the batteries last, which is like, it's been 2 years now, or until I turn it off. Yeah. Really amazing what it picks up.
I've thought about getting this forever, just like things flutter out of my head. And
Then it has a
I'd love to be
USB.
able to go back and listen, but
It's just my backup one. I'm recording it through Zoom, but that's my backup one.
right.
Then it has a USB that slides out, so you can just stick it right into your computer and download it.
Well, that's handy.
Yeah, it's really
You don't
cool.
have to have a table, it's just there to go. Yeah, that's really nice.
But that's gonna make a big click on the recording.
So you can blame that on Mike there.
I'll say, there's, well, it'll hear you talking about it, so we'll know.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I've thought about getting one of those, just for my own little notes and keep track of what I've been saying,
Yeah,
and
it's
what I
pretty-
talked about.
Pretty handy.
Said I can ramble all day long if you let me, stick a quarter of me and I won't shut up. but- Which often makes me forget what I was saying and what people were talking about. It's always back there and I just need a reminder.
Yeah.
Like that, and kick it forward.
Yeah, well, it's just backup.
Yeah.
I just don't totally trust the Zooms.
Well, I mean, technology's flaky.
You never know.
Yeah.
It's been good so far.
I developed certain things.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I worked for some of the biggest companies in the world. I worked for Visa, Broadcom. I worked for Novell. So
You do now?
I did. I worked for them. I left Novell, went to Visa.
My husband worked Perfect and then Novell.
Yeah.
It's
So
been,
Was he in Work Perfect or Group Eyes?
he was, I don't know what he was in localization and documentation,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thankless job.
interpreter, yeah.
Thankless job. I worked with them a lot in identity management projects, getting training. Documentation. localization is definitely not a thing that people appreciate.
No.
Unless you're foreign,
There-
but you don't really realize you appreciate it because you just gave me your language.
Yep. Yep,
Yeah, that's a lot of.
it is.
I think it's a big challenge because so many of the words and the descriptions are so new too. There's not always a direct correlation. German, you say that, oh, we don't. It's new, so we've never had a word for that.
Yeah. Well, he just uses English, so like Spanish, talking paragraphs in Spanish and then say computer or disk or PC or something,
Right,
anything like that.
right.
There's no Spanish word. It's just, everybody calls it the same thing. It's a
Yeah, a
disk.
lot of people have just started adopting, oh, you called it a widget, then it's a widget.
Yep, everywhere. Yep.
Except for the French. We're very adamant about making sure there's a French word for everything.
So we say,
Yeah, well, I don't know. I just knew that about the French.
that's interesting.
They're keeping their language very pure. So they come up, they, give it a gender, just a gender language.
Mhm.
And they come up with proper French for,
For that word.
yeah, the Germans used to do it, that's why you got computer with a K. Yeah, but I just always thought that was, I think it's a good idea. You lose some history when when your language starts to converge.
Yeah,
So I think
we're a lot more worldwide now than we ever were before.
Yeah.
German stayed in Germany and French stayed in France,
Yeah,
Mexican stayed in Mexico. Now it's just like,
yeah, we do travel a lot more, we're a lot first.
and the internet, everything.
Yeah,
I can order stuff from Britain and get it here, or anywhere.
yeah, we used to do lots of, when I was at Home Automation, we did lots of manufacturing in China and India. Ordering new boards and POCs to show our touchscreen, new light switches. Actually, usually we built them out in Logan first, because we could get it back that day. Cost, we ship everything out there, so yeah, people are flying out at least every other month. Working through it. Yeah, a couple of them, the big wigs, not the low end engineers. We integrated a lot with foreign countries, in manufacturing process and stuff. And they do a lot with driver development in Kosovo. Maybe those are Crimea, it's one of those two. They do a lot of development. What do you call it? Eastern Europe.
Interesting.
Them in the Nordic countries. They do a lot.
And he went to Sweden for 3 weeks to train him on something.
Mhm.
So I know they do a lot of software there.
Yeah, they got a lot of good engineers that do all that. They're outstanding engineers. So. And I guess all those same. Yeah, go back to my problem with being on the thing. Predestined values that saving properties instead of letting people utilize them.
It's true for certain projects. I don't think it's true for all of the projects.
Anything worth wide the days.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I was looking at Samsung, I was there, they were all saying plans for mainly with and it a process in education and I can't come back. I'm not saying that. Yeah, but I'm just saying, but it's still, yeah.
And, different discussions like my, senators. Well, let's widen this, leave it to Senate. Wow, that just makes more congestion. If you keep it tight, people will use it, stay tight. We're just going to stay wide. So you're creating a piece of.
You're backing up,
Vineyard has to start developing.
Like, I was looking at the.
backing up onto the
Maybe you
freeway.
need to start with the cat. I mean, you know,
That's talking to say let's.
well, you know, my point is if you start accommodating the behavior, then other people start, you know, working with you and saying, oh, they'll just give in.
Now, this one, how much they move stuff over to.
Do a good job.
There's no budget to be made.
So that I can address the problem. Well, since the state is.
Too late.
Yeah. All the same. We're gonna build on the outskirts, put all the, I mean, electrical, all the infrastructure in. Well, because of that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not telling you. I'm telling you. It said it, and I said, we were at road, but it's- the state stops funding them.
Well, let's-
Back who's funding them.
Are we at a point where we can resume the meeting? That? Not gonna crunch too loud?
Most cities do.
So you want to pay for potholes and all that?
So, Helena,
Yes.
are you guys ready? Okay.
Okay.
So did you want Bob to answer some of your, do you have a specific question or what did you?
That's why we don't have the money is because of
All off of page 35, the phase 1, phase 2, anything specifically?
I'm more interested in phase 2.
Okay.
But some of the people on the planning commission probably have some questions on phase 1, so if you have phase 1 questions, please ask me.
Well, let me, maybe, can I explain how this comes to be and maybe that will help shape the discussion, I think a little bit, and I start off mentioning that when, as planning commission members, you're in charge of creating a general plan that's specifically a land use master plan, and you're looking into the future and you're trying to determine, well, this land use may be this today, but it may change to something else tomorrow, or in the future, we want to see this, and so we want to see these changes potentially happening. And of course, that has effect on landowners, that has effect on, they see something on a map and all of a sudden they get concerned. But the reality of it is your general plan is just an advisory document to you making land use decisions that are zoning specific, right? So when you look at our master transportation plan, well, the MAG regional transportation plan and the city's master transportation plan, it's the same thing, but with transportation. What we're doing is we're taking the land use that we're taking the land use that you have planned. We're taking the population and employment projections that are given to us by the Census Bureau, by the state, allocating it based off of what your general plans and your future plans are. And then we try and say, okay, how are we going to accommodate the traffic that land use that you have planned is going to, how are we going to accommodate that in the future? And granted, it is a crystal ball exercise, right? It's not precise because nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. My favorite statistic is that we use is in the year 2020, the Census Bureau said 3,000 people lived west of Redwood Road. It's 2023 and now it's probably 160,000 people. So who knows, right? But what we do is we take that information, we distribute it, working with Sam, working with your community to say, okay, where does that work? Distributed in your community and the communities around you. And then the travel demand model that was mentioned before, it basically has every road above a local street in it, and it's very complex. I mean, it takes about 12 to 15 hours for it to run a single model run. And what that is doing is basically trying to predict where people are going, where people live, where they want to go, what kind of trips are they making, and it's very complex. Basically, all of this information, we put it in and we put it together and we say, okay, where is traffic going to be? Where is it now bad, and where is it, and how is it going to get worse? And then we work with communities and we try and say, okay, what are potential solutions to those congestion issues? So Orem 1600 North is it's pretty easy to see. There's congestion there and something needed to happen. And so it came out that widening to 5 lanes was the preferred alternative after much study and discussion that has been mentioned, and there you go. What MAG's primary role is not just to feed that information to communities, but also bring all the communities together to say, hey, we need to make sure that your projects are connecting up with the projects of your neighbor. A good example of that would be, right now we're looking at Pioneer Crossing in Lehigh very closely. Forever, Lehigh City has said, you're not going to build another freeway for our community. Well, there's almost freeway volumes. You know, when I say volume, you know what I'm talking about. There's almost freeway volumes on that road right now. But the impacts to fixing that congestion are significant, right? And so it is definitely a difficult balancing act to deal with. And how do you accommodate the people that are living in Lehigh, in American Fork, in Saratoga Springs, in Eagle Mountain? How do you accommodate them being able to get where they need to go, and also reduce the impacts to the local community as much as possible? I would concur with what Sam said in the future. Sam said about 1600 North. A lot of times, and I'm a Lehigh resident, born and raised, lived there my whole life. I don't live by Pioneer Crossing, but say for example, if I did live down there, if somebody said, hey, we want to expand the road, I'd be the first one in line to say, please buy my house, get me the heck out of here, right? And they pay everything. It's very fair. But what our job is to connect all these things together to make sure that the quality of life of your residents and the residents of the entire county are as good as possible, because traffic is a significant detriment to quality of life. It really is. Just like those people on 1600 North trying to back out to get into traffic during the rush hour. No, thank you, right? And so it is a difficult balancing act of how do you balance getting people where they need to go and want to go with the impacts. And it certainly is a difficult one. A lot of these projects are basically because that travel demand model, not only does it include all of Utah County, it includes the entire Wasatch Front. So we can use that travel demand model to tell you, well, how many people live in Payson but are coming to Orem for work or whatever, or at least they're pretty close approximation. And we can do that year by, we do that and we do it by decade, right? So the process that these projects are come up with, I told you, we take all this, what we call socioeconomic data, your land use, how many people are going to work here, how many people are going to live here, or as close as we can approximate. And we say, okay, let's grow population and employment by 10 years. Let's allow the model to have 10 years of that population employment, which means more traffic, right? And we run the model, and the model will then say, okay, traffic's bad here, traffic's bad on this corridor, traffic's bad on this corridor. And so we go through a pretty long process of trying to figure out, well, why is that traffic bad? Where's that traffic? What is the origin of the trip? And what is the destination of the trip? And so we look through that really closely, and we try to figure out well, what is the best solution to that problem? An example might be that eight south overpass, right? It's really hard to do much more to the parkway, right? But the parkway's congested. So then you gotta start thinking, well, is there things in and around the parkway that we can do to alleviate traffic for your residents? Granted, some people, it's gonna negatively affect some, but in general, does it alleviate the problem, the greater problem, right? And so we look into that, and then so we make some assumptions and we say, okay, let's add these projects in. Let's add these roads or transit or trails, and then let's rerun that 2030 version. And we see, did we get the red out? Because red in the model is bad, but green is good. Did we get the red out? And if we did, we're like, great. Are we gonna get all the red out? Absolutely not, right? It's just, you can't build yourselves completely out of congestion. So then we say, okay, those are the phase 1 projects, or I should say phase 1 needs. Those are the needs that we have, these projects in this community and across the entire Utah County. Then we say, okay, let's take that and let's build the next 10 years on of growth, population and employment, and let's run it with just the 2030 road network, right? So we added 10 years of people and traffic, but we haven't added any roads or anything. We run it again and we say, okay, where's traffic now? And we start to look at it and we say, okay, let's pick projects, so let's figure out projects and say, okay, just run it again. Did we get the green out? Okay, those are our phase 2 projects. And then phase 3, the exact same thing. Now, one thing of famous, I guess, I was in a meeting one time with the director of UDOT, and I want to add a little, we've talked a lot about the process of a project going from idea to actually somebody out there with a red cones and a jackhammer, right? We had the director of UDOT once said in a meeting that I was at, he said, when we draw things on a map like this, essentially in engineering term, that would almost be like crayon drawings, right? And then when a project starts to be initiated, then they start getting out the pencils and they start really digging into a lot of issues, right? So that's where this discussion of a project takes a long time to be created, because so much work goes into from drawing a line on a map, which does have effect on people, and I'm not discounting that, but drawing a line on a map versus actually being out there, there's so many steps that go into it. The Lakeview Parkway, MAC just funded the last little connection down to get it from Geneva Road down by the temple to connect it into the Provo piece. It's the last piece. And just that project alone, how long has that project been around on master plans? For decades, probably, right? And then now it just kind of got to the point where that project has been sitting on maps and I can clearly picture the lady that owns that farm down there coming to our open houses saying, Bob, this line's on the map. When's it going to be built? And we would say, we don't know. We don't have funding for it yet. It's not quite ripe, but now it's getting to the point where it is getting to that ripe stage. So now Orem City came and said, hey, we want to apply to MAG for funds to build this project. We said yes. And one of the things that we specifically do, and UDOT specifically does for a purpose, is when you say you want money for a project, you don't get to start next year. Typically, it's at least 4 years out, because there's a lot of groundwork that has to happen before you get to the stage where you're doing that. All the studies, the environmental impacts, the talking with landowners, the acquiring right away. It's a huge process. And a lot of times in those processes, the corridor may shift a little bit, or the idea of, hey, instead of building a signal here, let's put a roundabout in because that makes more sense because of X, Y, and Z. And we've done a whole lot more homework to understand what needs to be made, what needs to be done. And so when you look at this, this list of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 projects, I'm assuming all these are coming out of our RTP. basically, these are those projects that would have some effect in and around your community. But are we saying you shall build this? No, we're saying primarily what we're saying is, hey, I'll pick a project off of the list, Geneva Road. Geneva Road, we see through all of our work that we do, and it's not like Bob's going out and saying, yeah, let's 5 lanes on Geneva Road. There's a lot of work that goes into this part. But that's us saying, hey, there's gonna be a problem at some, and we think it's in this time horizon where there's going to be a traffic problem on Geneva Road. Widening to 5 lanes is a logical step in that, in fixing that issue, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the only step. And so this is kind of a getting this goes back to what John was saying. This is just the starting point for where a project it becomes somewhat of a reality. It's when a mommy road and a daddy road love each other, and this is where a road comes from. I don't know how to say it, but it's how a road or a project, transit trail, it doesn't matter. That's how they get started. But that project is, a phase 2 project. Those projects, we don't think they're needed until at least 10 years from now. And then even and that's our best guess, is we don't think you're needed for 10 years, but something to get on your radar screen. And then as we get closer and closer and closer, then the project can start to mature and we start to see the problem actually occurring that we guessed would be there. Then we start talking with UDOT, if it's on a UDOT facility, if it's a city facility, this group gets together and starts talking about, hey, we got a problem here, what do we want to do? And then we start talking about, well, these are the kind of things we want to do. This is roughly how much it's going to cost. Where are we going to find the money to do that? Is it through UDOT? Is it through MAG? Is it through city funds? Is it a combination of those things? And then money gets programmed to it, and then it starts the real rigorous study. And usually a typical project will be a line on MAG's map or a line on your map. And then how it matures, it'll probably just sit there until we actually start to see a problem. And then once we start to see a problem, then SAM or UDOT or MAG will start to say, okay, let's initiate a corridor study. And let's look at, or like the UView area study or something like that, and say, okay, what is the real, let's identify the real problem and let's identify possible solutions to it. And we say, okay, we go through that work. That's a year's worth of work. Typically, they'll involve landowners, people in the vicinity, and say, okay, this is kind of what we think we want to do. Then it will move on to probably what's called an environmental impact statement. Environmental, you guys all know what that is. That is a very rigorous couple years, millions of dollars efforts to really single down, zone in on, this is absolutely what we want to do. This is absolutely how much it's going to cost. This is absolutely the impacts. Is this really where we want to go? Yes. Then it goes on to construction.
How long, so right now we've got, looks like 6 projects in phase 2, which is 2031 to 2040.
Sure.
Which is 8 to 18 years out or whatever. 6 projects on there. How many of those will actually get built? Are we talking like 5 out of 6 are actually gonna happen, or maybe only 2 out of 6?
It is very dependent on a lot of factors. On
Historically, I mean, do we see most of those built or part of them?
It varies. I would say a lot of them. It just depends on, it's kind of like predicting the future. But yeah, a lot of them do get built. It just depends on, again, what the city wants to do, what UDOT wants to do. Is it supported region wide? And probably the most important thing is, did it compete well enough to receive funding? Because there's a lot of fires out there burning in Utah right now, and there's not enough money to go around and put them all out, right?
Is it the most important factor where the church builds another temple?
Well,
No, the city has to react.
no, yeah, well, there certainly are reactionary projects, but, and it is an imprecise, it's not a precise science, but there is huge benefit to looking into the future and drawing a line on a map. A great, again, I'm gonna bring another example on. I'm gonna throw Lehigh under the bus because I live in Lehigh. No, this is actually a good thing. How many of you have driven 2100 north on Lehigh? And lots of you. And how many of you, when you first drove it, you said, why in the world is the other direction 200 feet over there? Why is there this huge median in the middle? That's because MAG and UDOT and Lehigh, maybe kicking the street, screaming a little bit, said, hey, that west side's gonna grow, we need to do something, and we have to do something now, but we will need a freeway in the future, but we don't need it now, and we can't afford it now, so let's build the frontage roads. So we have the connection, and then when we do have the money, and we do know that we need a freeway, then we'll come in and we'll build the freeway. And there's so many less homes to build there. Everybody understands, hey, this is gonna be a freeway, etc. The funky intersection with 2100 North and I-15. It's weird, right? Well, it's weird because they built basically half of the system to system interchange when they did the freeway through Lehigh there, so that they could get as much built then. So when they come in to do the real freeway, it's already halfway there. And so those are the reasons, some of those reasons are the reasons why looking out into the future and drawing a line on a map, it is impactful, but it is a helpful thing. It is impactful. That's certainly the case, but it is helpful because it allows you to potentially move forward and help people out. For example, 1600 North, that line's been on the map for forever. Somebody wants to come along and sell their house, but the future buyers are smart enough to actually look around on maps and things and say, oh, this is gonna be a road someday. I don't know that I want to buy that house, and so there's a hardship. Well, that's where MAG can come in and say, yeah, there's the line on the map, we think there's gonna be a road there. We can provide funds for you, the city, to purchase the house, rent it out, and then when we need to do what we need to do, we take care of it, and that's what it is. When I bought my first house, my wife hated me because we looked for like a year, because we'd go look at a house and I'd be like, no, that's gonna be a big road, or no, that's gonna be a big road. She hated it. So that's how this comes together. But I think in reality, the future of your community is basically based off of what you guys choose to do. And that includes transportation.
And that's interesting you said that, because I think Orem is a little bit of an anomaly. Because the Orem residents see what's happening in Provo, have totally seen what's happening in Lehigh, and are watching what is going on in Vineyard. And they're putting their feet down and they're saying, we don't want to look like them.
Sure.
And they have spoken and they have said, we oppose high density housing. I mean, they wanted to put 30,000 extra people on State Street, and they are encouraging quite strongly high density housing in that radius around the front runner stations. But the Orem residents are saying we don't want it. So the question is, some of these 7-lane roads, are they there to accommodate 30,000 extra people on State Street that maybe won't be there?
They are based off of our projections of the future. We look at your master plan as much as we can to do that, but we're also kind of force-fed population. And the reality of it is, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but a good example, we're doing this Pioneer Crossing study, right? And Lehigh said, no way, we don't want a freeway coming through Lehigh, because all it is it's helping people from Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs to get on the freeway. We look at the modeling, we look at the traffic counts, and actually 30% of the people that use Pioneer Crossing are Lehigh residents. And you could, if you don't adding high density housing or not adding high density housing does not necessarily take away the need for some of these roads or add to needs to
Well,
lease
it would
roads.
have to add to it. 'cause
Well,
that's also
yeah.
on people.
But at the same time, for example, UVU, it was brought up, well, if there was a whole bunch of housing built around, if you changed UVU from a commuter school to a residential school, then traffic probably, it probably wouldn't add too much traffic because kids can actually then walk to school,
Right.
walk to their jobs or whatever the case may be. So it's not a perfect relationship of you add people, you add jobs, or you add traffic, you take away people, it automatically takes away all of the traffic. There is, I mean, you're a victim of your own success in a lot of ways in Orem, right? You are one of the economic engines of Utah County. You are the central business district, you and Provo are the central business district of Orem. And, or, sorry, Utah County.
Well, Lehigh's overtaking this actually by a few percentage points.
Yeah, but you still are the primary education locations, your primary medical locations. You generate far more,
We're more diverse than we are.
yeah, you generate far more sales tax and jobs, maybe not, but actual revenue and things like that. You generate that, and I don't know that you want that to go away, but part of the yin and yang of that is traffic, people coming to your community. And so traffic isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's because it brings people, it brings money, it brings jobs, it brings.
I'm not opposed to traffic. It's more at
What?
the expense of the people
It
who
brings
are
tax
here. in
base,
the
yeah.
neighborhood.
That's the point. I have a couple questions for you.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to believe what you're saying.
Sure.
I would like you to clarify your sentence, statement saying you're being force-fed population. That's a really unique sentence.
So, yeah, so that's a great, that's a good, I'll clarify that, so. Typically, so I told you that we get a population projection that's given to us, and Sam knows all about this. So Sean, so what happens is the Census Bureau does their thing every 10 years, right? And they do projections based off of that. And they give the state of Utah, they say the state of Utah, we think you're gonna grow by this much, right? And then we said, the state of Utah says, okay, and the Ken Gardner Policy Institute, in University of Utah, they take that population and then all their demographers, people that know about population growth and all that kind of stuff. They look at that, they look at plans and they say, okay, let's distribute that by county. Okay, so they say so many people are gonna live in Utah County, so many people are gonna live in Wasatch County, everywhere else. Jobs and population and employment, right? And so we are given that number and we're told you have to populate Utah County with that number.
So that's what I was trying to get to. You have to.
We have to populate it, and traditionally, no city plans, and we're talking 30 years growth. Generally, a land use plans, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years worth of growth. We have 30 years. But basically in Utah, we've grown so fast, no city really plans land use enough to accommodate what we're told future population growth will be. So whether it's Provo, Lehigh, we traditionally are saying, well, we can take your land use plan, build it out 100%, and we still got a gap of a certain amount of people that we got to plug into communities, including yours.
Okay, so I'm gonna have a few questions, yes. Can I explain that further about force-fed population? Yeah. Well, I thought you did a great job with this. Yeah, so you put your population in TAZs, right?
Yes.
TAZs, traffic analysis zones. Okay. So what we do at Orem City is we bring those TAZs to Orem and say, do you agree with these? So this is where we take what Bob did and we modify your model based on your zoning. So we took out all the transit high density corridors that you mentioned. About the 30,000 extra cars, we remove those because Orem says, no, we don't agree with it. So in this master plan, we took the data and we customized it for Orem City based on your land use plan. And so we divert a little bit
Okay.
from what they do to customize it for you. Okay, and so,
But if the future planning commission changes their mind and says,
Oh,
we're
yeah,
going to change the land use,
sure.
so they can come by density.
yeah,
Then.
but this planning commission told us,
Yeah.
remove the high density, so we removed it. And we went through Chaz by Chaz, and there's a map in here that says, Mag says this is what you guys say, and we change it or leave it, and we go through every single one.
Which, again, I do wanna believe that,
Okay.
but in 2100 in Lehigh,
Uh-huh.
you said that, what if the funding does not come? Like, you did the road that's expected to be already on another freeway coming in,
Uh-huh.
and it's difficult. You spend a lot of money to make
Sure.
this happen.
Yeah.
What if the funding does not come? Does that mean we wasted money?
No, because a project like that will come. That project's funded.
That's my point.
That project was-
That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point, where you said, well, the funding may not come. But we have to be ready for it. Yeah, this is where I have my skepticism, because the statements don't match.
You're talking about different projects. You're talking about very different projects.
Yeah,
You're talking about a state level project freeway
Mhm.
versus Orem City 8 South. Those are even remotely.
I completely understand that. I'm not the one that brought the comparison to the table either. I just use it.
Itself has UDOT money,
You gotta
ETA money,
You
yeah.
you gotta give me the benefit of that, because I'm not a planning guy, and I was just representing, there's a model that I have questions about.
So one of the things that happened or was said before you came in, eight South has state money behind it. So even if one doesn't necessarily want it, and even if we vote against it, like you got corridor down the parkway, sometimes state money trumps what we want.
That's not correct, because the city council and the mayor trumped the citizens and put that down the road. Yeah, it wasn't the state, it was.
Little background,
it was the
I lived in
legislators.
Eagle Mountain in 2001, where the only way in and out, go to Draper was through Lehigh
Yeah,
Main
Street.
Street. It was an absolute
Yeah,
nightmare.
citizens.
I saw Eagle Mountain, I was one of 11 homes, very first of the ranches.
Uh-huh.
And I saw the growth, it's incredible, and I think planning for the future is absolutely perfect. Especially when you have a lot of land like that, that
Sure.
should be developed, and you need to get into it and have it, it makes total sense. As an Orem citizen, I'm trying to see, is it the chicken or the egg? Are we trying to accommodate future population that is being force-fed by census? That's why we need to change the traffic, or are we changing the traffic in the expectation of being force-fed high density? We can't believe anybody, because
The reality of the transportation projects is they don't happen until we have a problem.
that's right.
So we're not gonna be doing anything until there's a problem.
That's
and
correct.
there's a
And the
problem.
only reason there's a problem is because you guys or city council or planning allows there to become a problem.
I don't like your tone.
I know.
I said, no, I don't try to on, but I don't know, it's not that, I don't like trying to do that down, so let's go.
I'm just saying,
He was chipping.
No, it's fine, I'm passionate, I can understand
I
that.
apologize, so, but I'm just building off something that we talked about earlier, you weren't here, I apologize.
No, my invitation was 6:30 and we had some last day, I think I'll take 30. So,
But I apologize, what we talked about earlier was transportation was always secondary to planning, so it's not a person.
it makes total sense.
But, so really, the point is, all we're doing is saying, look, here's some topical projects that we anticipate could be an issue in the future. But we're not gonna touch any of them until they're a problem. Until we reach a level of service E on any corridor, none of this is getting started.
That I believe,
That's correct.
that I believe, let me give you my point of view.
Sure.
Our words, as planning commission has been taken out of context. Where it says, we approve something that may or may not be a problem, and once we move forward with the positive recommendation, our word getting used like, well, the planning commission approved that this should go through, therefore you should follow through. I have been through plenty of planning commission chairman members and city council people in Orem City for a long time, where my business personally hurt financially. So I just don't believe the way it gets handled, that's the one person's mouth to the next. Is what we're being told now is not what really is gonna happen down in the future. This is what I was taking, if we wanna build a good, worthy relationship. I mean, I live in New York, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, I understand what traffic is going. Where there was no, there's people, and now because of Pioneer Crossing, it makes total sense to move there. So it's not that. This is the issue is the way it's presented. I get told, we're just gonna set this project up and spend money on it in case it happens, but it may not happen. But you guys are gonna lose on funding. So either give us a rubber stamp and go, or lose all the money, and we're like, oh, how can we serve our citizens best? How can I do that? How can I mean, we know that there's a light rail that's going on, that's in your 950 plan, 48 pages for it. A light rail, UDX is no longer enough, we have to go to light rail based on the next 10 years and the next 20 years.
There's options, but I understand what you're saying.
But basically, when you presented with those ideas, and then the contradictory statements, what's gonna happen about that? Which one? And then like, yeah, it's like, oh, okay, just find it and we'll study it later. It just doesn't work like that.
Well, I think something that's important to remember though is this is planning. This is, yeah, we don't know what the future is, but this is looking into the future with the best available data, the best available scientific background behind how to plan for the future. And you're right. We don't know what the future is going to be, but like he said, this is a, hey, we think these are potential problems in the future. Think about them, be prepared for them. When the problem comes along, then there's so much of a process that goes into fixing the problem. And at some point, this community may say, yeah, we don't want to fix the problem. We're okay with what it is. And that's your prerogative, right?
To your point about chicken and egg, and we're all stuck in this. If the Census Bureau came out and said that 5 billion people were gonna move to Nevada. Well, people start thinking, I guess I should be in Nevada because everybody's going there. And part of it would create the fulfillment of the prophecy, right? And then part of it is, well, a lot of people are coming, we should plan for it. So there is a typical chicken and egg issue there,
Absolutely.
but that's the nature of government in the United States at the federal level, and we are downhill from federal. So you're
Well, and I
voting
think-
against it. So you're voting against it.
No, and I think it's even down to the local level, right? You're trying to make way decisions of your future of, do we want to grow? Do we not want to grow? How do we deal with traffic? Do we not want to deal with, I won't say not deal with traffic, but what do we want to do to deal with the traffic? And so, again, this list of projects is, I don't want to, I'm trying to both say, we do the best state-of-the-art way to try and figure out when these projects need to do, what they need to be, what they do. We do the best we can to get that. And the first phase, we're pretty good. We're pretty good. Phase 2, a little less, and then phase 3, that's 30 years from now, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, it's very much, we're doing the best we can, just like you're trying to do the best you can to see in the future of what you want Orem to be and decide how to do that. And so, well, again, all these projects, they are just of, hey, this is a potential future problem. Let's draw a line and say, this might be a problem in the future. Let's keep it on our radar screen. If there's something that we need to do and be doing in the interim to help facilitate that project, then we're prepared to do that. But if we're not interested in it, then you don't have to, right?
Let me go on experience.
Let's look at phase 2 projects, for example.
Okay.
They're 2031 to 2040.
Mhm.
There's gonna be another plan before this
Yeah,
comes.
we redo our plan every 4 years,
Okay.
but we're required by law to do that.
Yeah, so law requires that you redo it every 4 years. It could be that things have changed in Orem. I'm not gonna go through the myriad of ways that could be.
Yep.
That one of these projects is no longer a problem
Yeah,
and it
absolutely,
would fall off. But
absolutely,
there is something else that is identified as a problem and would be added.
very much
And
so.
they would move up to phase 1 because we'd be in the next. Or if we're in the right time period.
If
then
it
would
shows
move
the
up to
need in
phase
that
1.
time frame, yes.
And then if the need manifests itself.
Uh-huh.
Because it's already identified and listed, that has started it makes it easier to start the process and access the funds. that we have.
Absolutely. For example, UDOT, the big UDOT dollars that pay for the big stuff, they call it the TIF. A project, in order for a project to be eligible for TIF funds, it must be listed on phase 1 of our plan. It is not even considered unless it is on phase 1 of the plan. And even once it's on the plan, then it competes statewide. I mean, I mean, the list of projects is 90 long and probably $5-6 billion worth of projects, and they spend maybe $1 billion a year.
And so if the 4-year cycle happens and there's things on phase 1 that don't need to be in there any longer, they
Yep,
be
it drops off.
But if things have changed and there's a real problem that has come up that we didn't foresee through the modeling, it could be added.
Sure, and our list can be amended as well. It gets a little bit tricky, because there's, I don't necessarily want to go down this road, but air quality issues that we have to deal with, and specific modeling for air quality. But yeah, I mean, we try not to make too many changes because a plan that keeps changing is not really a plan. But there's built in flexibility there, yeah. And this, again, this list of projects is very educated, studied guess of where traffic's going to be and how you could alleviate it. You could ignore all of it, but potentially to your demise, that you're caught not being prepared for, and you have to wait longer, and the project goes longer, and that you don't get the solutions done as early as you potentially.
Because we're already talking about years for any of these things.
Oh, yeah.
Like, even once, they're just on the list right now, so they first have to get approved and funded.
Yeah.
And then it's years
Yes.
still before it actually
That
happens.
is correct. Years
So-
and lots more detailed
Yeah,
study
yeah.
and work that goes into engineering that goes into it.
So if it's not on the list to begin with,
No.
we're bumping ourselves back in that process.
Very much so. Yes, That's
Well,
correct.
the conflict, if they could look at the first under phase 1. That was supposed to be happening
Yep.
sooner than later. It's not.
Yeah, well, the project, when a big factor right now is inflation. Inflation has killed construction. We kept growing. The cost of projects went way high. They're basically a crazy problem is UDOT has is they don't have enough consultants to do all the work they need to do sometimes, and they don't have they could potentially self-drive up the cost of concrete because have so many projects that they're buying so much of the concrete that they're driving the concrete price up to the point where they may force themselves to pay more money, right? It's very complex of how all this happens.
Okay, so, and on a driving experience, this is something you guys should know really well. But a city like Orem, we only have 3% of the land available to build on.
Mhm.
You expect population to grow somehow in Orem, even though we're kind of almost out of land. Does that increase the number of population correlates with how much land left?
Yes and no. I mean,
So no answer?
well,
Has to be redeveloped. then.
yeah,
That's my.
there has to.
It's a hard question. We seem to go one step at a time.
Well, to answer your question, yes, you have very little free land to grow, but you do have free land to grow. And redevelopment is a very big thing, and it happens all the time. It happens in lots of different places. And then also, I mean, maybe jobs, you increase the number of jobs. I mean, there's two sides to every trip. There is home and then the destination. And you guys have lots of what we would call destinations in your community. Jobs, people going shopping, people going to school, people going to the doctor. It's not just households, it's jobs is the second half of the trip, right? And so you may not have a lot of greenfield space to grow, but you absolutely could grow. And it's just depends on how you could choose to grow.
One of the advantages of MAG doing their traffic analysis is they look at things like path through traffic. Right, like, or probably gonna keep going, right? Unless growth can keep going, and how much of that traffic is in Orem, right? Or make trips to Orem. And where our local city one may not look at that, MAG does, and that's very, and although our, you're right, and I hope we don't continue to grow and redevelop, but that doesn't mean the trips aren't going to increase.
Point to that comment though, because we put 800 East on our plan, we put. Or University Parkway on our plan. We created a pipeline for Provo to put all those high density houses where Shopville used to be. If it wasn't on our plan, and we told them flat out, we're not widening this corridor for you.
No,
It just means.
Nobody would have bought it if you couldn't go through. I mean, if you can't get out of your town.
I would disagree with that because Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs are a huge example of where tens of thousands of people build a house out there, even though it takes an hour and a half to drive out there.
Yeah. That's because they want to be away from everything.
No, it's because they can afford to buy.
That's why I thought it would be nice out there.
It's for because they can.
Not
afford to buy
really.
houses.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Try to qualify.
So I love this.
My cousin is.
I'm just curious. What is your, what do you guys want? You just want to have a discussion or we want to have a goal?
Not my neighborhood.
Want certain projects on or?
I don't think we have a goal.
We did have a goal, and our goal was to understand more clearly, like I asked for like an hour and a half ago, could you explain this new freeway connecting Pioneer Crossing to University Parkway? Could you visually demonstrate it for us? I can't see how that's going to connect, and I would like to see it, so that I would like to understand what the rough guidelines are for some of these projects.
That's a good question. We don't have a goal to stop any of those things. We have a goal of understanding. We want to be able to make a better informed decision when it was presented to us in the last meeting. We literally have this whole thing to read through and you want to do it. I mean, it was new and was programming. Do you want to go ahead and give us a positive recommendation? And I'm like, no. We want to understand it. Let's not stop it. There's just logistics. The Orem City can read it all. How's it going? We don't even have that in the master plan. We do have issues with high density. You mentioned first things, traffic is a significant difference in quality of life. Are we going to bring that on us? Are we going to be able to?
Or is it going to be brought on to you?
So there's so many questions, but what I'm seeing here is like, there's only one way to fix it, you guys. It's only one way to fix it. This is it. Like, okay, well, let's see how it goes. Oh, we don't. I'm not trying to say that, oh, well, we don't like it. That's right.
To answer, can I answer your question just really quick? If you go to our website, go to mountainline.org. And we have, so all these projects that you're talking about, they're all listed out there, color coordinated. What phase, if it's a phase one, it's.
Point it out for us.
Don't do it.
Well, so it's this red line right here,
Okay.
Pioneer Crossing, Vineyard Connector, down through here.
So it's right by the lake, on the inside.
Again, these are crayon drawings, right? Meaning we haven't gone out and looked to see all the impacts, like the very fine-tuned impacts. That's where again, this is a solution to a significant problem. I-15 can't handle all of our eggs are in I-15. We can't do that for the next 30 years.
Well, UDOT came here, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but they told us they're not building anymore. Like UDOT, did they say they're not widening I-15 anymore?
Well, they can't widen I-15. They can do improvements to it, but if they added any additional lane they add to the freeway now actually reduces its capacity instead of
So
improving.
they're done with I-15, so to the extent that we need an alternative, I mean, we've got to hold us on that.
Yeah.
So is that wrong then about the I-15 widening? Is that not?
No, the question, no, with I-15, so if you look at it, there's actually a few projects mixed in there and rarely is the problem fixed by one solution. I think with I-15, all of our eggs are on I-15 right now. And I-15 is going to need to be improved. Likely, it's not gonna be widening the lane. It's probably gonna be something like, collector distributor. It could also be an alternative connection, this Vineyard connector to Geneva Road or whatever down
Right there.
where a bridge or across the lake potentially. There's lots of different things that go into this. And again, because you got to recognize that a way to understand what we as MAG are grappling with on the regional level is Utah County is 600 and something thousand people right now. We're predicted to be about the size of Salt Lake population and employment wise by 2050. And if you look at you look at Salt Lake right now, they have I-15, 215, 80,
Right.
the Bangor, all this stuff. We have basically I-15 and a big lake in the middle, right? And so that's where a lot of these big projects, we're like, we gotta do something. Would you click on when needed? That's probably the better map. See, though, that shows the phases, so everything in red is something that we see potentially needs to be done in phase one.
I'm sorry, what was the color that's red?
Red is phase one, blue is phase two, and green is phase three. And you'll see there's some dashed lines. We don't have the 100% answer of what the actual solution is. We just, through our modeling, through our work, we see that, hey, there's big problems places that we need to figure out solutions to, and building a lake potentially is one of, building a lake crossing, building another corridor here, building, expanding the freeway, but by doing something like collector distributor or high capacity HOV or something like that. They're not gonna add another regular general purpose, like you said. So there's, these, again, these are just, this is a working thing to get people started. This is meant to start this conversation so that you guys, when some of this stuff starts to mature, you have a plan. It's not blindsiding you. You understand where this is coming from, why MAG is doing what it's doing, why Sam is doing what he's doing, and why, because your master transportation plan is a miniature, I should say miniature, but is a reduced version of our long range plan, right? It just, we feed it externally with maybe some traffic from outside of your community. And you deal with what's inside your community, hopefully connecting and making that work. Yes, sir.
I have a question here. Are there any plans for Provo getting more freeway access? We are right now feeding Provo.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here, actually, got it.
There's actually a project.
Yeah, they
right
want to
there.
keep their neighborhoods.
It's, you see that red line right there, 820 north? So
Could you show us?
he's doing right now.
Okay.
So there is well, and this is a controversial project. It is on Provo's plan. And UDOT actually has money identified to look at potentially building another interchange right there, kind of in between your two communities. That, and then widening 820 north, right, basically right toward the hospital and BYU. And so that is a project that it's on our plan. It's kind of, it hasn't caught, I don't know, it's controversial enough that Provo's a little gun shy about it. And so there's politics, there's studies. Oh, yeah, that project exists because of the parkway and that, yes, that project basically is on our plan because of the parkway.
Why is
Can
Provo?
we get $5 million, not do a south, give them that?
Yes, let's do that.
The problem is that's about 125-30 million dollars right there. Why are they?
Yes.
Well, the city is not necessarily, and this is Bob's, I don't know, they're buying homes along the corridor right now. There are citizens in the area that are concerned about it. But the people that live on the road, they're willingly, we've bought several homes for Provo City in that area. And so,
35 years ago, when I was a geography student at the Y, we went through the exercise of developing and designing a plan to put a freeway exit in that neighborhood.
Sure.
In that area, and 35 years later, Provo citizens generally are opposed to it still.
Yeah.
55 years ago, when I was married, this was.
Oh, yeah, this is,
They did one.
this has been there for forever. It is.
They want us to make traffic plans for them.
One of the other things that we did with the transportation advisory committee is we also talk about what are other ways to alleviate traffic. So there's huge
Absolutely.
emphasis on roads, but we also talk about what about better bike paths? What about
Active transportation, transit,
transportation? What about,
absolutely.
UTA has come and talked to us about what their plans are for expanding public transportation. So it's not just all
Sure.
about cars and moving people. So that's something that we are talking about a lot in this meeting as well.
I was gonna ask if I could shift the conversation a little bit. We've talked about the theoretical to death and understanding it, and it's important. But like, some of the specifics are where my questions apply, specifically section 3.1.1, which is about the BRT light rail plans. And that was one of my hopes coming here tonight, is I wanted to hear from you guys a little bit, and from Matt and Sam, like, how do you feel about that? Where is it at in its process? That's what I, like, that was one of my questions for
Sure.
tonight.
Oh, that's a good question.
Specific.
Can we move on? I guess, let me ask before we,
Yeah.
are we done with the
Are you okay?
theory? So we're at which page?
51.
So
Bottom of the page.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go ahead and answer a question unless somebody has a concern. So for our understanding, so you probably heard of the Central Corridor. Is that ringing a bell to people, Central Corridor?
No.
Okay, so transit, just in general, transit is part of the solution. It is not the solution, but it is a part of the solution. It's, and so, about pre-COVID, so probably about 4 or 5 years ago, UDOT and UTA, at the request of the communities in the area, specifically along State Street northward, said, hey, we want to look at a capital transit investment north to south that is not just front runner, but is more along the State Street corridor-ish, right? And so they commissioned a study, they looked at it. And so they said BRT was the preferred alternative, mostly because it was cheaper and it was more flexible, but, and so they did that study, and then they said, okay, maybe we're ready to move towards environmental work to understand a little bit closer. But when they did that study, they saw the price tag, and they said, well, let's maybe slow walk it a little bit instead of jumping right into full environmental, because one issue with having environmental, and John will correct me if I'm wrong, once you have an environmental done, it only lasts as long as the project is spot. It's got 4-year lifespan. 4-year lifespan. Once the project, you need to start working on the project, whereas you're buying property, doing design work, whatever. There's a ticking, there's a time, countdown going, sorry, thank you. And so they said, like, wait, before we take that big jump, let's step back and say, can we segment it? Meaning, can we do it in phases that are a little bit more fundable because it's a huge investment. And the latest is they're getting ready to start that kind of study to just relook at where, I don't know how much realignment they're looking at, but they're looking at, okay, what segments make sense, what segments don't make sense. And then there's a kind of rock thrown into the machine a little bit with the prison site relocation and the potential extension of tracks. If tracks gets extended down to the prison site and over the point of the mountain to Lehigh, which was the original starting point of this central corridor, well, is that going to be our BRT? Is that going to be BRT up there too? If it is going to be light rail, and if it is light rail, does it continue as light rail down here? And if it does become light rail, does it still follow some of the same central corridor locations? None of that has been set in stone or decided. But again, this is one of those, hey, transit, so transit, this is another place where you say, transit can be a solution to part of the problem. We're not 100% sure exactly the mode or exactly where it goes, but we can show along these corridors that it works and it can help the problem. Just like UVX really helps the Parkway and University Avenue in a lot of ways, that it could potentially help State Street or Geneva Road or wherever it ends up being. So right now, it's still in a study. We don't have, not everybody's fully decided on exactly what it's gonna be because of politics, because of cost, because of lots of different reasons, but that's why we do these studies, is we start, again, it's kind of whittling down to what do we want to do and what do we want to see and what external forces are pointing in that direction. Because it's a big capital outlay. It's a really big one, and so we try the best we can to make sure well, I should say UDOT, UTA, us, the city, try to do the best we can to make sure we're dialed in as much as possible before we move ahead.
So basically what I'm hearing from the MAG side is that there's a lot of potential, but like for our master plan is just basically saying, something could happen, so we're putting a place in here. I mean.
Yeah, it's like a placeholder.
A placeholder.
But it does have an impact. Because you can't build on the property, it's reserved because it's part of the.
Well, we're talking
No,
about
you
Seventh
can't,
Street.
we cannot. The city, you guys do this more than the city government cannot preclude you from using your property, whatever your zone that you're using.
But it rezones it so you can't develop on it, because what was that term you used? for their
That's
business?
called the taking though, and you'll have to pay for that.
Right, I mean, but we've got it down 8th East, they didn't put the Ivory subdivision out to 8th East because it was already set up to go down wide.
But they agreed to that, right?
But they agreed to that and they were compensated for it.
Sure, but that's my point, is you're setting up for the inevitable. Because you put these plans in, rather than letting it naturally develop.
But if it
Because
naturally
if you give an
developed,
Ivory the
But it-
go ahead, they would have put homes on that.
and if the problem would have existed, then we would have had to widen it, and then we would have had to buy a whole bunch of new homes that. and
It
we
still
would have
doesn't
just-
exist to this day. It's pretty easy thoroughfare. I drive it all the time.
But in the future, we're not saying that. it
But that's
needs to be
been
built
20
right
years
now.
ago. That's been 20 years ago. So
Wouldn't some of this be quite political? Now, the University Parkway bus system,
Uh-huh,
you testify on that being a success.
uh-huh.
So others would not agree with that. I'm curious, so the people that are driving these studies that come up with these plans, have to think of one way or another. In other words, I know that some people want cars to go away.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think our job is to look at technically what moves people, right? And you could have, the reason, I'll qualify my saying UVX was a success is because it reduced an additional lane each direction on the Parkway. So building the bus reduced enough cars on the Parkway that we didn't have to build another lane each direction. Yes, yes.
So I ride
Yes.
along that freeway.
And it's busy, it's still busy.
Buses are busy, but no one's on.
Well, I would tend to agree with you, and I did until UTA came
Okay.
and they gave us the numbers. And I 100% came into that meeting saying, this is a joke.
they give us numbers though, but we visibly never have a correlation to those
I
numbers.
tend to agree with you,
So,
but
I mean, I'm seriously contemplating getting 100 people together and say, staggering, let's count.
I don't have a bias one way or the other, but it seems, I went to a planning event about a year ago where we were exposed to a lot of, what seemed to be state sort of initiative being pushed down to the communities. And there seemed to be biases, from my perspective, certain things. And so, I think, as I say, near the Parkway, and I make it a point, in the buses, especially in the sea, they're always empty. I'm telling you. You don't agree with that. that?
I ride the bus.
Really, okay.
Yeah.
Who's on the bus with you? And you know better than me.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time of the day.
Yeah.
It for sure does.
Tell me I'm wrong.
But I started actually counting people on buses for this reason, not on UBX as much because the buses are a lot bigger.
I count deals all the time, yeah.
But I mean, people are moving and maneuvering past my bike, that's kind of in the way, because I ride my bike to the bus stop.
Okay.
I've done the 850 bus on State Street and there's.
That one's
easily
ridden a little bit. yeah.
25, 30 people on the bus.
What's
So
that?
every time you see that,
Yeah.
that's a car removed from the road. Right, if you assume that most people would be driving by themselves, so that's taking it off, so. The capacity, I don't know what the stats are on UBX, it's not back up to the pre-COVID numbers about what it was, but it was.
They told us so, it was the second most ridden bus route in the state.
If that's true, then
So it
UTA
doesn't-
needs to go away.
I mean.
I mean, seriously, that's sad.
The number that's coming to mind is that they are at least hitting 7,000 rides a day. And it had been at 12,000 before.
How often do you like that bus?
So I take the bus or my bike in the bus to work at least 50% of the time, so once or twice a week.
And
Is it increasing from what it used to be? Or COVID, student?
Yeah, and UU is still doing a lot of classes online, whether they keep those or if they go back to more in person, that'll increase.
So most of the riders will be the students.
There are students, but there are also people that are coming from South Provo when I leave campus, because
So.
there's a lot of people who are like, have come through Provo and are maybe going. I don't know where they're going, but they're going.
Well, like, if I live
Yeah.
away from that.
We should bring up some reasons.
A child who was attending UVU or BYU or.
Yeah.
I mean, we got
Certainly. make it
the census
convenient
that's
to
been
say
passed
that a lot of
really.
hospitals-
Yeah, and it's and I just think, we have these conversations all the time because Kathy thinks that like she never wants to ride the bus ever, and that's totally fine, right? So I say, anything you can do to make it easier for me to ride the bus, to get my car off the road, makes your car experience better. Right, so even if you're not the user of it, if we make it better for people who want to use it. Or who would be inclined to use it if it were better and easier to use, then it's making the system better for everybody, because if you're in a car, it's better that I'm not on the road in my car.
So I just think you can add biking into that too.
Oh,
I think it's a total big missing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So on UBS during rush hour, it's. Rough numbers, taking between 100 and 150 cars off the road in each direction. Every 5 minutes or so, the bus goes by. Now, that's during rush hour or during a football game, right? The bus, if you go down at 10 o'clock in the morning, the buses do look fairly, there's no question.
Maybe I should have earlier.
Honestly, I would say ride UBX, it's kind of a fun experience, but I also really like.
I think the problem that we say is nobody's supposed to bus.
Yeah.
Now, I'm from Europe, public transport is masterful in Europe, but they don't have dedicated lanes. The buses share the lanes with the cars and there is no problem. But when you're driving, because I live right on University, and that lane stays empty, until the occasional bus comes by, and I'm thinking, why isn't the bus in our lane and why do they have a dedicated lane? That's where it seems a little.
Dedicated lane to get people used to light traffic. That's anyway, it.
Yeah.
Well, it's
I mean,
also, if you have, now, if you have 25 people in the bus, that's 25 cars that could have been in that.
Yeah, agreed.
So even though the lane gets us,
Sometimes every 15 minutes.
yeah, that one shows that.
The cars could be in that.
BRT,
We're not here to
BX,
discuss
I think
this,
it's-
but I think
It's
it's same bus.
Phase 3 is 15.
Sam, would you say the bus is the best in Europe?
So it is, I mean, the hard part for me is there's also, there's tax dollars that are generated. Okay, there's about $120 million of tax money in this county. That was a few years ago, that's generated for transit. 20 million of that is generated here in Orland. So part of it is the reason why we want to do this plan is I think the citizenry here, the people that are coming here and shopping, we're generating money for that. And either we can say we can be part of it or we can give that money to another community. It's really kind of that simple.
How much are we spending? Like, if you look at the BRT, and the T sheet cost benefit analysis, how much is it making us? How much are we spending on it?
Way less than we spent on previous.
So,
Well,
do what we want, or we
you are,
give you
you are
your
the
money back?
transportation committee, right?
Well,
And
I mean, but that's another,
But
you know, just- I don't know how we could give them buses.
Yeah,
But
we
it's
need
just,
better legislators.
but the fact of the matter is we have the money. We want to have and get something for it or give it to another community. So the way I look at it is, they're doing enhanced service on State Street. We got UBX.
But it was.
No.
If we're looking at other enhanced services, if that's what we can do, or we bring in UTA and say, can we do commuting type hours? Can we do something that's express? Because that's where the most bang for the buck is, right? Is to get people from home to work and just kind of be a partner with it. That's my solution to it. Do I ride the bus? No. Would I ride it? I would if it was within 20 minutes. But it's, I think, an hour and a half or 2 hours for me from Springville. So I mean,
Yeah, I
Depends on
contemplated
how
right
we
in front
want
of
to
her
cut
when I
the
looked up
cost
in
benefit
Sandy, but
analysis.
yeah.
it would have added about 2 hours.
Obviously, the
commute every
city.
day.
But with
And I
that,
wouldn't have had a car.
right, but with all that being said too, there's, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
now is
It's
the
gotta be
time where
convenient.
Same way we're trying.
if we're gonna plan, let's try and plan.
If
If we want mass transit to work, if it would have worked for you, if it would have worked for me, can we kind of develop nodes and destinations? And can we do things? Because right now, we're so auto-centric. Everyone goes everywhere. I ride by myself, so does Bob, so does John. I mean, everyone. Well, you kind of stink. That's why I don't ride with you. But anyways. But anyways, I mean, but if we can plan those things and develop things, because Europe essentially has a great system, but they've kind of said, hey, we're not widening. To get a license is really expensive, to get fuel is really expensive, to get a car is really expensive. So they've incentivized it. Granted, I'm sure they're paying a lot in taxes to go ahead and do and have that as happen as well.
66% of his salary to taxes.
Right.
They are way.
So I mean, but for paying that, you should
That's
have a
what
good public
socialism
transit
brings.
system, right? I mean, that's kind of that
That's
expectation
right.
where,
No choice, no
Right.
money.
so,
If
So-
if UCA put a bus. Walk to your house, walk to work in 3 minutes. You would be more likely to run.
Yes, you said. So there's really cost benefit.
They can't have the money and to build it, they'll be.
So we should take it.
But the thing is, I don't ride it to work and then I
UBU
do
pays for it,
away.
BYU pays for it.
and the
They-
thing
they-
is,
they-
Get my way all
all
the
city
time with
goes
that
up.
kind of a travel. cost.
so,
Cause I couldn't use my car to go to the store.
And just BYU and BYU in the state.
Yeah,
State.
How long?
but they also have more European.
It's lasted for as long as it existed.
Cause they're all.
How long do you think it's gonna last? Yeah.
it'll continue.
It's been, I think it's got
Europe
legs,
was built
it's
on
worked.
horse and buggy.
The colleges like it.
Yeah.
The state recently looked at, the state recently looked at making all
I
transit.
like old British cars.
Oh, so wow.
Healthy, I actually think it's healthy, because I want, for me.
I appreciate your comments.
Because I want to hear that you guys are citizens, we're citizens, I think we all keep feeling, I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. I feel we keep being put into boxes and we don't have time really to discuss it. And I'm not saying that's just the fault of our individual commissions or whatever, but I just, citywide, I don't feel like we have a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of needs, and there's a lot of different needs. There's needs beyond what we have right here in this room. And it's not one solution is going to it is, but we need to have some healthy debate that's constructive.
Today, we are, and it's not, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You guys, let's not put all those money in, and they're going, and I just went back off. So this debate happens.
So I guess to clarify too, this is something similar to what Bob said. We revisit this every four years, five years. So it's not as if once this is in, it's going to be gospel doctrine. It's going to change, it's going to morph, and it's going to move around because we have growth, but if the growth changes, land use isn't changing, things change.
Can I also say, this is the 2015 plan, slightly updated for 2023. We as a commission don't necessarily agree with everything that's in there,
That was one of my questions.
but we don't, we're also not redoing it for 2023. So we did that, and that's why we did our cover letter. I'm seeing that, we did a cover letter, we don't agree with everything that's in here, but we have a vision, right? And that was the point of our cover letter. So, again, knowing that we're not, pinned down on everything that's in here. We weren't like, okay, we're gonna scrap this and start over. Right, we're gonna let it go for another 3, 4, 5 years. And then
I think that's a good point, and maybe kind of to try and bring things full circle from my perspective, and I'm the outsider here, so you can tell Bob to shut up and go away, and I won't feel bad at all. But I think coming full circle, it seems like from an outsider's perspective, one, there's a little bit of a maybe not misunderstanding, but concern that by having things on a map, you're pinned down, this is absolutely how it's going to be. And hopefully, we've tried to explain that that's not necessarily the case. There's so much more that goes into these before, from a project go from on a map to reality. So to kind of bring it back, it seems like a lot of the concern is maybe with things that are drawn on the map. And the question is, how do you become comfortable with what's on the map and what's part of the plan so that you can make a recommendation one way or the other? And I think hopefully, again, I think this is why Sam brought me here, is asked me to come so I can get a free sandwich. But it's also to kind of help you understand that this is a plan, and that's all it is a plan. It does have effects, and good meaningful effects, and it does have some negative effects. So I guess the question is, come back to what's keeping you from saying yes, and that's probably what the conversation needs to get to now. Yes, ma'am.
Could you go back to the map and still show us how there is going to be a freeway from the University Parkway to Payson? I guess I'm really, I don't like
It's not on there necessarily now. It's basically that green line that's going north and south. It's potentially going over Provo Bay, and it's basically, what we're showing is basically I-15 gets to the point where it's potentially failure, and UDOT is not going to like that, nor will people in the community like that. So potential solution, and this is a phase 3 project. So this is.
It does say phase 2.
Well, now this is the updated project is phase 3.
So Bob, I think if you.
Oh,
take
it's,
this
that's,
from this
that's the
plan,
plan at the beginning, yeah.
it's a conceptual plan. The plan has more, when I hear plan, it's a plan for a house and we're gonna build it. The conceptual plan is like, okay, these are some ideas.
Sure.
It's a semantic issue
Ways,
that might solve that.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
So.
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, when Mac develops this, are you guys, it doesn't UDOT project?
Yeah, we're not gonna be able, we can't afford that.
Yeah, is UDOT involved with Mac?
Absolutely.
So you guys are.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So when we do this, not only are we hand in hand with UDOT, but we're hand in hand with the entire state. So we just cover Utah County. There's another group just like us that covers Salt Lake North. We're called MPOs. There's 4 MPOs in the community plus UDOT. The state has told us, hey, you guys all need to get together and you need to agree upon financial assumptions. You need to agree on the fact that how much a project's going to cost. So if a project was built in Salt Lake County, it would be conceptually the same amount as it would cost in Utah County. So we're all playing from with the same deck of cards. And so, yes, this is highly coordinated thing. And
How many mags are there in the city of Utah? How many?
4. It's called an MPO, and there's 4.
But you talk about it in different context.
Yes.
I think Mag's the name of our.
MAG's the name, Maryland Association of Government,
I understand that.
but MPOs, there is us, there's Wasatch Front Regional Council, which basically covers the north part of the Wasatch Front, so Salt Lake, Weaver, Davis.
Who supervises the group of these NPOs? Who do they report to?
Well, MAG only reports to a board that consists of all the mayors of this county and the county commission. But we all work together with like UDOT and
Is there
their,
not a dotted line to some state?
no.
You will have one
The-
boss.
So our boss is the board, but the reason we exist is federal law.
Okay.
Federal law says, MPO, if there's a if there's a population center that is so big, above 50,000 people,
Who calls the meetings? Who conducts the meetings?
are the chair of our board. We facilitate the meetings, but the board. So it's, so.
So the governors.
Like you
The
did.
board is all the mayors. It is in bylaw that the members of the board are the mayors and the 3 county commissioners.
Okay,
And there's a representative of UDOT and a representative of UTA that are board members as well. And every year they vote, that group votes to appoint the chairman of the board. But that person is just the person that runs the meeting. They don't have any extra power. That group has to come together to make decisions. And Thursday night, when we adopted this plan, it took hours and there was debate and people were upset because they didn't get what they wanted. But they understood that there are certain parameters that we have, planning parameters that have to deal with and realities they have to deal with. And they said, you know what, we're not getting it all, or we're getting things that maybe we don't want, but we know that as a region, we have to move forward. And I think that's kind of a little bit the way this, you guys gotta be is, hey, you've got parameters that these guys have put together and said, hey, these are what we're seeing, these are potential projects. We may not like all of them, we may not want all of them. We may have not got ones we wanted, but at some point we gotta be able to move forward, understanding that there's lots of wiggle room in there.
so it feels like ultimately a lot of your day-to-day tactical direction is gonna come from the Department of Transportation at the Fed level, the EPA. Don't they set rules that you have to follow?
No, they do set some rules, but basically our direction comes from that board.
Okay,
I mean, I guess think of it this way, we're playing football and the federal government says this is how you play football, these are the rules. But our coach, who says what we're gonna do, is that board, is working with Sam, it's working with your mayor. Those are the people that are directing this. We are technical staff to that group.
Are your phase 1, 2, 3 projects the same that are in here, or do you have the city level? Do you have the city level, or are you just?
I don't know that, since it's so new, I don't know that it's broken down, but if you look at that map, you can see all the projects and it will be up on our website pretty quickly.
Historically, we haven't always been that way.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't, the plan doesn't change drastically very often. From one phase to another, it just depends on what projects get built. What, sometimes city politics or politics may push things in a different direction. And so that adjusts things a little bit. But a lot of the plan is solely, we work really hard to make sure that projects listed on the plan have technical merit, meaning they're on the plan because we show with the tools that we have that project, something needs to be done there. And those parameters that we're dealing with don't shift too much, too drastically plan to plan, but we do it as frequently as we do it every 4 years because they do shift a little bit.
That's.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Where I grew up, public transportation is massive and so needed. When I moved to this country, without public transportation, I wouldn't be able to make my first dollar. So I need it, and people need it, I get it. I never noticed it, how I said it. We never had dedicated lanes, everybody shared the same road. And there was no push either way. You must use this, we must choke you out of driving lanes by adding a big bike lane. It was not a possibility that I'm seeing here, and this is really the agitating part is. It's the pressure points, it's like added paid points to make sure decisions are directed a certain way. That's what I feel, but in the same time, I'm like, yeah, I want to see buses, I want to see them getting used, I want to see my kids use them. So it's a big difficult.
I think one of the big differences between Europe and, I'm guessing, the Latin America somewhere. So.
That is not Latin American at all.
Sorry, regardless, Americans had cars before we had buses or trains.
Yes.
Europeans, Latin Americans.
Buses were first and used before cars,
Right.
mass transport was used before
So
cars.
we are just the opposite.
The American dream.
Yeah.
It's not just that, but it can tell the whole transport, you can't get ready for it. Where else it comes from, they drive on the wrong side of the road.
Oh my gosh.
And I live you take your luck.
Well, I was telling them, I was just in Ireland. And our tour guide was talking about train stations and things like that. She said, you know, we used to have train lines to all of these little villages. And then people got cars. And everyone would prefer to use their car. So they've done away with all of these train lines. And the train stations are now little.
If you drive in England now versus when I was there 50 years ago, few cars back then, people were ever so polite. Now when you drive, they're not so polite. And there are lots and lots and lots.
It's not wrong.
I've got to go here pretty quick.
Yeah. Amen.
You don't spend money.
Do we have any other questions for Bob? He's got to leave.
I hope you, I hope that I helped. I hope I educated you. I think maybe would be the goal. And again. From my perspective, I think what you're doing is great. This has been a good conversation. Ultimately, it comes down to how do you move forward, right? And recognizing that while recognizing that it's just a plan and a conceptual plan, sure. And that whether a project's drawn on the map doesn't necessarily mean it's absolutely going to happen. But it aids you guys in preparing and potentially moving those projects forward when ignoring it and waiting may cause it to be more expensive, delay, etc. But ultimately, how do you choose to?
With inflation, it
Develop
might
your
be
com-
cheaper in 5 years.
Actually, inflation has only made it worse. Actually, one of the most, UDOT will sometimes quote that typically with a project, especially an urban project, 50% of the project goes to right away, the cost of the project. That's where like 2100 North, they made that, if they had to buy all those houses and build it out, instead of $600-700 million, it'd be 2 billion, it'd be $1.5 billion. And it would be a lot harder to do, right? And so.
Crossover, this thing had to go through to get to Saratoga Springs. You know, they're building all those houses. And so if they bring anything just north of the lake or through there, it's gonna kill them.
Yeah.
We keep saying, please save that, somebody save that.
Yeah.
It's all ours.
Yeah, and so anyways, I thank you for your time. I hope I've helped. I probably have stirred up the pot a little bit too. I didn't mean to do that unfortunately, but.
Thanks for coming.
Thank
We
you for your
appreciate
time,
it.
and if you ever have any more questions, Sam knows how to get a hold of me. What is my title? So, so Matt, we do two things. We plan, which is this, and we also program, where we have, and programming means actually putting funds towards projects. I oversee the programming portion of it. So basically, when Sam says, hey, East or the Lakeview Parkway connection. Sam says, I want to build that, and that seems like Matt could fund that. I run the process to where those projects get funded, see it through to the end.
You're the phase one guy, so.
I'm the phase one guy.
He's the phase.
Well, so I'll put it this way, you have a transportation master plan and then you have a capital improvements plan, right? I'm the guy over the capital improvements plan. Or back.
What for you has inflation been in the last year?
Over the last 3 years, it's probably totaled over 40%. Projects have gone up over 40%. It's drastic. It's caused a lot of our projects that we say, hey, we need this still in phase one. There's no way we can build it in phase one. We can't afford it for 10 years. It's a struggle. Thank you for your time.
And thank you to the transportation. We really appreciate letting us come and speaking with us and think through some of these things. Yeah.
Anything else to discuss? Anything else? We
Anything else?
anything else?
Yeah, when you get noise, I start losing people in the crowd.
And it doesn't record either.
I swear.
Huh?
But you guys, wait.
I don't know. Are we done?
New developments coming in, or just like.
I mean, it's essentially, we gotta adjourn.
Fundamentally, I'm for you being argumentative, but like, not always, especially your transportation, like the.
Yeah, are we good? You want to close the meeting?
It is very good. And I would think if we're.
Is anybody have any questions or me?
Like,
There we go.
yeah.
Wait.
You don't have
I
to.
just want to say something if I could. This has been one of the funnest meetings I've ever been. And I say that a little tongue in cheek, but I honestly mean that. I love just sitting back and watching the conversation, the debate, the passion, the concern. Serve our neighborhoods and our citizens and looking out for them down the road, as well as today, looking at other options. It's been great to just to witness this. And the fact that you're all here as volunteers and. Who's volunteering?
I was told there was gonna be a picture.
It's on there that watches the sandwich hearing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Still more over there.
Dave, I just want to say thank you for being here. To you gentlemen, thank you for your expertise, thank you for sharing that with us tonight. It's a marvelous thing to live in a city where people care so much. And thank you to the planning commission for joining us in this meeting. As was said, a lot of this stuff we talk about on a regular basis, but it's good that you're here and see and understand and feel what this commission. And we debate, I mean, this is not really new. We've had some conversations like this amongst ourselves on a regular basis. And I think the debate's healthy, it's good. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Isn't it, if we make a controversial decision in our commission, now we can just say the planning commission. approved it.
Well, I think that's like, isn't that how this goes? So we want to work together, we want to be united. And feel comfortable about what we're doing, what we're going to do for the citizens.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
We adjourned.
I really don't know. I mean, I guess
So.
gotta ask Madeline what she wants us to do.
CRT, we want micro, and
I like this one too.
Yeah.
like, you don't have the density to require. Infrastructure.
I can,
And they're like,
saw that, I knew they were local.
but that's where, like, it went through some planning, right?
Yeah, but some of that legislation change is saying we'll only put it in, and there's a lot of partners from my husband, my husband, you front runner, we could.
I'm like, I'm not gonna.
No, it's not, and it has a lot of. We paid a lot of MTA stuff, I'm just gonna be honest, MTA stuff, that's our home, okay, we love it. And my kids are like, started going, that's bad planning. But it's interesting because UK has a huge problem because of the parking constraint, right? They want the riders to before they'll put people there, but they won't put things there, so it's actually, I mean, if you look at it, you look at where the ETA routes are. I looked at it and I was trying to find, it makes sense why nobody rides. On the outside, all the neighborhood, and then, you know. Yeah.
So last thing I'm like, I'm a little bit far, I don't know why. I get right there, I'm just pretty low. I'm like, so I need a couple to get there. And if I need to there are times where I would love to see the
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
let me double check here.
Yeah.
Which I tried my notes down.
Oh, that's- yeah. I wish they would have that one when I was
Half my
writing.
neighborhood teachers.
Yeah, there's a lot in here.
I'm happy accounting. In my neighbor.
You look really familiar, yeah.
What is she?
Not on.
And I appreciate you.